back to the Clean Reads podcast. I'm your host, Izzy, and today's book is called The Great Good Thing by Rodrick Townley. This book is about a named Sylvie. This is a YA middle grade fantasy about a young girl named Sylvie who's 12 years old. Now, I read the description of this book in the library, and most of the books I purchase are from the used book section in a library. And I saw this one, and I read in Goodreads, it said she's been a 12-year-old ever since this book was written, called The Great Good Thing. And she is bored of her normal life. It is repeated over and over again every time somebody, usually they reference as capital, the reader. When the reader reads the book, they basically act out what's happening within the book. And you know those little storybooks that you would read to your grandkids or your nieces and nephews, to younger audiences, or even when you yourself have read one of those small picture books like Fancy Nancy. Well, the characters in The Great Good Thing, they actually act out those scenes. But Sylvie, she starts getting bored being a 12-year-old girl for 80 years, replaying over and over again the same scenes. Nothing ever changes. And there's no really in-depth personalities to anybody but her herself, because she's the most dynamic character inside that book. One day, after being on a shelf for a very, very long time, not picked up, a little girl named Claire decides to open this book. She is a reader, and she lives outside of the book, while Sylvie lives inside the book itself. Sylvie looks up at this girl, Claire, and she starts to make a connection with her. And from then on, she goes into her dreams, Claire's dreams, and she gets to talk with her and help her out in her dreams. And this story is so weird because not do the characters in the book are alive, but they also go into dreams in your subconscious. So when you're asleep, she's actively talking to you. Well, not you, but when Claire is asleep, she's actively talking to Claire. And that was just so weird. That was just one of the really weird things about it. It's not a bad book. It's just, I've never read a concept where the character inside the book is actually alive, comes out, and then goes into your dreams. I've never read that before or heard of anything like that. And if any of you have read a book like this, and it's good, or even if it's bad, just comment down below. I'd like to see what other books are like that out there. I've never heard of a book like that with that kind of storytelling. You see, there is something that I should point out. It deals with a lot of grief, and that itself is a very sad book because Claire's grandmother dies, and Claire, while she reads the book, The Great Good Thing, to her grandmother over and over again while she's dying, that part's very sad. And then eventually in this, if you want to skip this part, you go ahead, but in the story, almost towards the end, not completely, Claire dies, and Sylvie has to get out of her head, along with all her family and the other book members, and you'll see how that happens throughout the story. Yeah, it was just, if you can hear my neighbors in the background, I'm so sorry. We have really loud neighbors. So the age rating, I want to say Claire does die, and Sylvie ends up going to Claire's daughter, Lily. So one thing I really liked about it, there was no cursing, or there was no real language. I don't even know if they said stupid in there, which is great. I think that's at least 12-year-old level or 11-year-old. They do say thank God twice, I believe. I'm not quite sure, but I think it was just around 2, at max 3, but thank God, thank goodness she made it out alive. It wasn't like sarcastic or anything, which is good. There was no gore scenes or battle scenes. There wasn't really even like violence, because other than this jester who wanted to forcibly marry Sylvie and take over the kingdom. and like the and of course the jester makes fun of Sylvie and like is rude to her, and she's like he's not my favorite person in the world. And it's just funny to hear that dynamic. It is sad though in the death aspect, I will say that much. It's not super heavy though, but it is noticeable. Oh, and there's this one part in there where, and this is at like the very end of the book, where there was a few changes made in the, when Lily, Claire's daughter, rewrote the book, The Great Good Thing. Sylvie encouraged her to make a few changes, and this girl with the dark blue eyes, as Sylvie calls her, there's no really given name for her, but the girl with the dark blue eyes says the author noticed that you did it, and Sylvie was like, the author, he or she is not alive. And the girl with the dark blue eyes said, no, she's alive, she just comes in different forms. And then Sylvie looks at the grasshopper, is that her? And then she looks at the sun, is that the author? And it's like, that's definitely new spirituality being hinted in there. And I know it's very minor, but it's probably one of the most like outright new spirituality, like suggesting things that I've read so far in a book, where it's saying it's like she's reincarnated. And that's a big role in the new spirituality thinking. And it was just weird to read that. And that is probably the only other thing. And the author lives on forever, basically, in a simple sense. But there's no real anything bad about this book. Yeah, there's nothing bad in this book. Like, I'm scanning it through my mind right now, like each chapter. Each chapter, by the way, is so fast-paced. It's so fast-paced. You want to keep reading. It's 216 pages, and it felt like less. But it also, that single book could have been like a trilogy, just based on how much information you're getting into each and every chapter. But I thought it was written really well. There wasn't really a huge character arc, in my opinion, for Sylvie, but I really enjoyed reading about her and how she's like maturing. It's like, it's not all about her. I'm gonna miss my parents, as she's going into the next girl's brain, or next girl's dream. Next girl's brain, that sounds normal. But yeah, it's just an overall great book. And the age rating, I want to say 13 plus, because of the it does talk about death quite a bit, and it does say stuff about reincarnation in the last chapter. That if you want, a 12-year-old could read it. I'm not discounting 12 or 11-year-olds. I don't think a 10-year-old should read it, but if you thought your friend who's 11 or 12, or your daughter or granddaughter, whoever you would recommend, I think that's pretty good. I think they would enjoy it. Like, I'm a teenager. I'm like midway through high school. But I enjoyed this book a lot. So if you thought a girl 16, maybe 15, and who knows, maybe even 18-year-olds would like this as well, I think they would really enjoy it. I think it's a really good book, and it's so interesting. It's just really interesting format. I've never read a book like this before at all, and I think it's a great book. I feel like more people should read it. It is a trilogy if you did want to continue reading the series. I don't know if I will, because I just loved this book so much. I don't want to commit like, oh, the second or third book isn't as good. But I would also say, if you wanted, I may do it just for the sake of doing a podcast episode on it, to where I finish all 3 books and my thoughts on each. I read this book within 2 days, and I gave it like 4.5 stars. Like, it's not a 5-star, and I feel like if I gave it lower than a 4-star, that's just... because this book was so unique. And I've never read a book like it, and I don't know if I ever will read a book like it. But it wasn't exactly a 5-star book to where it's like, oh, I want to read it again. I think about it 24/7, 365, every single hour of the day. But it is a really good book. I can recommend it to pretty much any age and think like, oh, they could probably handle it. And it's not, the depression part is not so heavy to where it's like unbearable. It's like, I'm gonna cry. I didn't cry. I got sad, but like, other than that, it's fine. Here's some of the quotes that I have from this book on page 6. As her head sank into the stuffing, the earlier thought returned. What if readers really did have other lives that had nothing to do with her world? The idea went against everything she'd been taught. So that's from Sylvie's perspective when she looks up at the reader. Page 16 to 17. The princess could feel the cool shadow of the reader overhead and hear her breathing. Storybook characters live for the sound of the reader's breathing, especially as it softens and settles like the breath of dreamers. And then page 22. That's when the jester is like making fun of her. Her dress is messed, the reader's a pest, and that's no jest. It's just like, thanks, dude. You were very cordial. Anyway, it's just so rude. He's like probably one of the least favorite character. Oh, and I felt like there was a love interest, but it's not a romance book. But there was this one thief named Thomas who wasn't exactly a thief. He liked helping people. So I think that was just like a play off kind of thing. Or maybe Rodrick Townley will influence that into the next book, of the trilogy that he has. I have no idea. I need to check on that. And the last quote, page 158. This was not the proper imperious queen Sylvie had known, but a woman who had been through trouble and whose joy at seeing her daughter was so keen it seemed a kind of pain. A pain. Man, I messed up at that last little bit. Yeah, this was a really good book. I recommend reading it. It was a very fun fantasy. And yeah, I'll see you next time in the next episode of the Clean Reads Podcast. Thank you for listening to the Clean Reads Podcast. Please comment down below on what your favorite book is, and if you have read this book, The Great Good Thing, or if you read books similar to it. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are about this book if you have read it, and if you have any books, recommendations, fantasy, historical fiction, whatever genre that you like. I'd love to hear your recommendations, and maybe that book will be on an episode of this podcast. Thank you for listening. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share to friends and family. Goodbye. See you next time.